"Step back, I'm a federal agent." Elijah's voice cut through the screeching rails like a blade. "Back off, that's my mother." On the abandoned tracks of Mosswood Station, Angela Brooks holed motionless, clutching a USB that held the truth behind a black friend's mysterious death tied to state police. The train was seconds away. No time to count. "What state are you in? Has your state ever buried a truth so dangerous it could derail the whole system? Watch till the end to find out. Will justice arrive in time or be crushed under the weight of silence?" Angela Brooks never expected much from the old mailbox in front of her house, just the usual electric bills and lawn service flyers. But that morning, amid the clutter of junk mail, something unusual lay still. A silver-gray envelope with no return address. No stamp, no postmark, just a short handwritten note folded inside. "They think everyone is forgotten, but the dead haven't rested. Help my child. I can only trust you. Please keep this secret." That was all Angela needed to know. Something in there wanted to come to light. She locked the door, drew the curtains, and plugged the USB into her bedroom computer, the only place she still felt remotely safe. When the file window appeared, a series of folders showed up, unnamed, only numbered 1414. She opened one, a forensic photo loaded, blurry at the edges, the victim's head obscured, but bruises around the neck and scratches on the arms were clearly visible. Below was a PDF file, the autopsy report. The final note on the last page had been blacked out, but the time of the emergency call had been manually altered. She skimmed through one file after another. 14 cases. 14 victims. They had one thing in common. They were all black, died under unclear circumstances, and were handled by the same police department, Mosswood. Then she stopped at a folder named My Secret. Angela's heart skipped a beat. She clicked. Linda Cole, her best friend from college, the one who had shared a dorm, secrets, and even the time they were pulled over by police for fitting a suspect description. Linda died 2 years ago. The official ruling was suicide. She fell from the 7th floor of her apartment complex. But Angela had never believed it. She remembered that night Linda had called, saying she'd found something about Mosswood and wanted to meet the next day, but that morning the news reported that Linda was dead. And now, what Linda had tried to reveal was in Angela's hands. Angela sat frozen for nearly an hour. She considered backing up the data, emailing it to Elijah, or sending it to a news outlet, but she knew if it got intercepted online, no one would believe it was real. She stood up, opened her filing cabinet, pulled out a pale yellow folder, and started printing each page. Photos, forensics, audio recordings, metadata, timestamps. The printer whirred like it was sighing. Each page emerged like an undeniable indictment. She slipped the documents into the folder, labeled it Public Library to throw off suspicion. Then she wiped the USB, broke it in two, and dropped the pieces into separate trash bags. Angela checked the clock. Almost 6 a.m. If she left now, she could make it to the newspaper office in the next town. She had once met a young journalist named Lana Kim at a civil rights seminar. That girl had fire and a reason to believe in justice. Angela didn't tell Elijah. Not because she didn't trust her son, but because she knew, if she warned him, there might never be another chance to do the right thing. Angela left home in the dim light of early morning. Not a clear dawn, but that murky gray light that made it feel like the world hadn't fully woken up. She wore a thick coat, the file folder pressed against her body. Inside were the pages she had printed the night before, wrapped in that old public library cover like a worn disguise. The train station was quiet, with only a few people waiting. When the train arrived, Angela chose a window seat near the back. She didn't like sitting among crowds. A few minutes after departure, a white man stepped into the car, glanced around, and picked the seat opposite hers. His eyes passed briefly over the bag next to her before offering a polite smile. "What office are you with?" he asked. Tone light but unmistakably probing. "Business trip? First time to Mosswood?" Angela didn't answer right away. She nodded slightly, eyes fixed on the window. "I'm visiting someone." He smirked, like he'd heard that line too many times. Mosswood's not really a town where people have a lot of friends. Not wanting to continue, Angela got up and moved to a seat near the emergency exit. The man said nothing more, but she could feel his eyes like invisible needles stitching down her spine. About 20 minutes later, as the train passed through a fog-covered hillside, her phone signal began to weaken. Angela pulled out her phone and dialed Elijah. She knew he was working at a federal post near the border. Hard to reach, but this couldn't wait. The line rang. A static hill hello answered. "Elijah, you have to listen. Do you remember Linda Cole? She didn't jump, and they know about Mosswood." Right then, the phone beeped. The screen went black. No signal, no connection, nothing left. Angela stared at the dark screen, as if trying to pull back the words she hadn't finished. She placed her hand over her coat pocket. The USB was gone now, but the truth it carried remained. It would decide the fate of everything Linda once believed in, and of Angela herself. The car door behind her slid open. The same man stepped into the aisle. He didn't smoke, like he'd said. He pulled out his phone instead. He glanced into the carriage. His eyes met hers. Not hurried, not embarrassed, just the look of someone who knew exactly who he was watching. Angela held the stare for a second, then turned away. Her heart beat fast, but not out of rhythm. It was too late to turn back, but not too late to finish. She closed her eyes and drew in one long breath. The train kept moving. The truth was still in her hands, but now she understood. She wasn't just carrying evidence. She was being watched, and if she fell on this journey, there would be no accident. Just another name added to a list no one wanted to talk about. The train stopped at Mosswood Station with a quiet screech of brakes. No loudspeaker announcements, no one getting on or off except her. The sky remained overcast, just like at departure. Gray clouds blanketing the horizon, pale light slipping through frosted glass. Angela stepped off, and the first sound of her foot hitting the platform echoed with a dry, hollow tone, so unfamiliar she instantly felt she didn't belong here. The station was deserted, not a kind of emptiness that brought peace, but the kind that felt like someone had intentionally left it that way. No ticket collectors, no other passengers, no signs of daily life. Everything was too still to be accidental. She had only walked a few steps when two uniformed officers emerged from the edge of the platform. Kyle Benson, tall, buzz-cut, eyes blank but quietly menacing. Drew Carver, wiry, moving like someone constantly battling a fever. They didn't greet her, didn't introduce themselves, didn't ask if she needed help. Kyle simply stopped, blocked her path, and looked her up and down before holding out his hand. "ID, what's in your bag?" His voice was flat, yet it commanded without needing volume. Angela handed over her identification card. Drew took it, barely glanced, before curling his lips into a half-smirk, half-sneer. "Civil Administration Office? A paper pusher here?" Without waiting for a response, Kyle bent down, unzipped her bag, pulled out a yellow folder, something she had carefully disguised, and opened it, flipping through the pages in a rushed but intentionally careless manner. He grabbed a few sheets, crumpled them, and tossed them to the ground like trash. Angela gasped. "You have no right to do that," but her words landed like a dry leaf on a concrete courtyard. Kyle looked at her, and the slight smile on his lips left one unsure whether it was mockery or just satisfaction. "In Mosswood," he said, voice low and deliberate, each word pronounced clearly, "we don't need warrants for strangers, especially the kind that knows too much." Angela instinctively stepped back. Drew remained still, as if awaiting an unspoken signal. Kyle took a step closer, forcing her to retreat further. He didn't push her, but where he stood left her no choice but to move. Her heel hit the concrete edge near the railway track. She glanced around. Still no one. No cameras. No proof of what was about to happen. A train horn sounded in the distance. Not urgent, not fast, just steady, like a reminder. Drew glanced at Kyle. Without needing a cue, Kyle raised his hand and shoved Angela decisively. She lost her balance and fell onto the concrete step near the rail, her back slamming onto the cold, gravel-lined ground. No one shouted, no one helped her up. Kyle looked down at her from above, as if he'd just taken out the trash. Angela lay on her side, one cheek pressed against the cold stones, fine dust clinging to her face and entering her nose. Her left hand clenched tightly at her coat pocket, where the USB was hidden, the only thing they hadn't touched. The documents had been torn, stepped on without mercy, and scattered like scraps after a cleaning, but the USB remained, small, flat, cold, resting in her palm like an unread promise. She forced her eyes to stay focused, fighting the dizziness. The train was coming, its wheels grinding rhythmically against the tracks, like the groaning of a woken beast. It wasn't fast, but there was no sign of it stopping. Through the gray sky, the engine emerged like a blind mass of steel, thin black smoke curling around it. It approached with a certainty that didn't allow for negotiation. Kyle walked closer, stepping over the crumpled papers he had just tossed. He didn't yell or raise his arms. He only leaned forward, gazing down at her with the detached eyes of someone who'd already made up their mind. His voice was low, not hoarse, not cold, just steady, like a greeting, a lesson for those who don't know their place. Drew stood behind, saying nothing, not objecting either, his hands in his pockets, his gaze turned away like it wasn't even happening. No screaming, no cameras, no witnesses. The station was so still that even the wind didn't bother to pass through. Every movement seemed absorbed by the concrete, then dissolved. Angela tried to roll over. Her neck ached, her left arm barely lifted, but she forced herself to inch forward bit by bit. She didn't look at Kyle. She looked straight at the tracks, at the train approaching with the pace of a sentence being carried out. The train didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just continued, one steel wheel following another, like a programmed countdown. She didn't scream, didn't plead, but her eyes were wide open, unwavering, not because she believed someone would show up, but because she wanted to witness the final moment, if this truly was the end. Her breaths came fast, not out of panic, but because her body had been tense for too long. In her mind, she didn't think about death. She thought about Linda, about all the names on that list. Deaths no one questioned, final words no one heard. If she didn't get up, it would all vanish again. She knew that well. Then another sound cut through, the kind that didn't belong to the train. It came from the far end of the platform. A sharp screech, tires scraping against concrete, followed by the clang of metal slamming into a barricade. A black SUV had skidded past the railing. Its door burst open. Someone jumped out, not waiting for the train to stop, not waiting for orders. Angela couldn't see the face, but she recognized the figure, recognized the cadence of footsteps running toward her like a primal reflex. In that moment, she knew. Not everyone turns away, not everyone stays silent, and not everyone arrives too late. Angela could no longer hear her own voice. Everything inside her head felt sucked out, leaving only the howling wind and tremors pulsing straight from the concrete into her spine. The train was approaching, not fast, but relentless. Its consistency made the fear more brutal, as if fate itself was inching forward, unhurried, knowing it would prevail. She lay on her side, cheek pressed against the jagged stone. Every breath took seconds to gather strength. Her hand clutched the pocket of her coat, where the USB stayed tucked like a stubborn memory refusing to fade. The papers, copies of the truth, were now just shredded white fragments, caught in the wind like dry season leaves, and the man who had trampled them still stood just steps away. Angela opened her eyes once more, not to plead, but to witness the final moment of a silence that had lasted too long. She didn't think of herself. She thought of Linda, of Thomas, of all the names stored in that USB. They had once lain there too, waiting for someone to arrive in time, and being left behind without a defense. The train screeched louder, its headwind slapping her face like an icy palm, reeking of diesel and scorched metal. A shadow blanketed her face. She felt the reversed pressure of its speed pushing against her chest, draining the last air from her lungs. She didn't scream or thrash. She simply closed her eyes again, not to surrender, but to preserve the last image of what she believed, that if the truth was still in her hands, it was not yet dead. Another engine roared, tearing through the moment. Not the trains, sharper, an intruder, breaking the verdict's rhythm. A black SUV burst through the gate into the platform, tires skidding sideways, a gray spiral of smoke rising to the sky. The door flung open, no delay. The man who stepped out didn't look around. Didn't need to ask what was happening. Elijah didn't run. He launched, like a bullet from the chamber. All he saw was his mother near the tracks, eyes dull, body twisted as if guarding a final secret. Her hair was soaked in sweat, her shirt torn askew, her hand still covering her chest where he knew she clutched something more precious than life. Kyle turned just in time to catch Elijah charging in. No words, no threats. Elijah grabbed Kyle's collar, yanked him off balance, and slammed him into the platform wall. Quick, clean, leaving no time for response. Drew froze a few meters away. His eyes flicked to the FBI badge Elijah had just pulled, not as a warning, but a sealed verdict. Elijah didn't look at anyone else. He shouted just one line, "Step away from my mother." His voice cracked, not from rage, but from compressing every emotion into 1 second, between life and death, between saving and losing, forever. He knew if he had arrived seconds later, the fragments on the ground would be all that remained of the truth. Elijah slammed Kyle again into the platform wall. The dry thud echoed like knocking on the hollow skull of a reckless fool. Kyle's shoulder hit hard, leg skidding to the side, back twitching in shock. Still unsure what had happened, Elijah didn't pause. His right hand drew a hard badge, raised it at Drew, who stood stiff in the dusty, paper-littered yard. "Federal agent," Elijah barked, voice sharp, louder than the rumble of train wheels. "Back off, step away from my mother." His eyes locked on target. His gaze was a honed blade, ready to slice through any leftover illusion of power on the faces of the Mosswood officers. Kyle jerked, trying to break free. Too short, too late. Elijah twisted his arm, bending the elbow at an unnatural angle, pinning him to the concrete with force that left no room for resistance. Kyle groaned, not in pain, but from the total loss of control. Drew remained frozen, eyes scanning the badge, then landing on Elijah's face, reassessing the game he thought he'd already won. Elijah said nothing more. One precise move, he flung Kyle aside. The man collapsed against the edge of the wall like a limp sandbag. Elijah turned to Angela. She was still there, half her body by the rail, arm pulled to her chest, hand clenched around something hidden in her thick coat pocket. Her eyes barely opened, lashes trembling as the train's screech neared her ears. Elijah bent down, arms circling her shoulders, lifting her firmly. No questions about pain. Nah, asking what happened. No hollow reassurances. He did the only thing he knew must be done. Get his mother out of here before it was too late. His arms lifted her off the ground. Her legs couldn't push up, so he braced, leaning to the right to keep her body from hitting the still vibrating rail. The distance between them and the train was now measured in steps. 6, maybe. No time to count. Elijah backed quickly, spine hitting the signpost, arms locked tight. Angela gasped, not in panic, but from lungs compressed too long. Her whole body felt hollow, except for her left hand still clenched, as if letting go would mean losing everything. A long screech tore through the air. The train shot past. The gust whipped her clothes, tugging at her like wind through a cracked door. Angela didn't open her eyes, but she knew she had lain no more than an arm's length from it. The smell of diesel clung to her hair. Metallic dust floated like the ashes of something that never had time to burn. Elijah instinctively curled over her, shielding her from the iron windstorm rushing by. His face coated in dirt, his back soaked in sweat, but his hands never left her shoulders. He looked down at her closed eyes, shallow breath, but her face was calm, as if something long overdue had just been completed. Angela tilted her forehead to rest lightly on her son's chest. No words. No cries, no tears. Everything had already been said, in a language beyond speech. She closed her eyes again, this time not from exhaustion, but because someone had finally arrived in time. 6 seconds. It might have been too late for many, but today It was enough to keep her here, enough to make sure no one else would ever be left behind like this. Elijah gently tightened his grip. In his arms, his mother was still here, alive, and the truth remained whole in her hand, where the USB lay like an uncut artery. The train kept running along the rails, but now everything had changed. The call came just as Elijah had taken Angela to the nearest emergency medical center. She underwent a preliminary checkup, no serious injuries, but her blood pressure had dropped and she needed time to stabilize. He stood in the hallway, not sitting, eyes fixed on the door to her room. When the phone rang and the screen displayed an internal code from the regional coordination office, he already knew it wouldn't be a message of recognition. The voice on the other end was cold, as if reading from a pre-written script. No thank you, no mention that Angela had nearly been run over by a train, no inquiry about whether he was injured during the intervention. They cared only about one thing. You were present in Mosswood without official written authorization, exercising federal agent authority in an area not designated for federal investigation, violates interagency communication protocols. A temporary suspension takes effect for 24 hours, starting immediately. Elijah said nothing. He didn't interrupt, didn't respond understood, didn't offer any rebuttal. He hung up while the other party was still speaking. His hand gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Part of him wanted to scream, to hurl the phone to the ground, but he knew that would only be an expression of helplessness, and helplessness changed nothing. He leaned his head against the cold white hallway wall, eyes fixed on an undefined point. The chill of the concrete crawled into his shoulders and neck, pulling him back from the tide of emotions rising within. What he had just done, rushing into the platform, subduing 2 officers, saving someone from being crushed, should have been hailed as heroic, but here it became a procedural violation. He recalled the look in Drew's eyes when he saw the FBI badge. It wasn't fear, it was arrogance, interrupted. Then, just as quickly, replaced by reassurance, because they knew the system would always side with those who had the proper paperwork. No one in the higher offices knew his mother had been tied down next to the tracks, and even if they did, they would likely ask why he didn't wait a few more minutes to assess the situation. Elijah turned and walked down the hallway like a man beginning to lose faith in the idea of doing the right thing. He thought of all the training sessions, all the hours spent on ethics, all the banners hanging in FBI headquarters about the value of human life. He had believed them, had truly believed, but that belief had just been trampled by a system that prioritized procedure over life. He stopped in front of Angela's room. Through the glass, she was sleeping, breathing evenly, but with effort. Her hand still clutched the pocket where she'd hidden the USB. He looked at her for a long time. A question surfaced in his mind, one he never thought he'd ask himself. Was he wrong to act on instinct today? And if saving his mother was wrong, then what could possibly be called right? Elijah turned and walked away from the hallway. The suspension could pause his role in the system, but no one could suspend a son who sees his mother about to be killed and chooses to act. He knew that, and he also knew if he didn't return to Mosswood soon, there would be no one left to do the right thing, no one left to rescue the truth from its next silence. Angela's room resembled a safe shell, just enough to make one forget it was a newly designed detention unit. White, clean, orderly. No cameras inside the room, but signs of surveillance were visible in every hallway. Every corner was rounded. Every feature was designed to make the occupant feel protected, when in fact it was about control. Angela sat on a wooden chair beside the table, feet flat on the cold floor, hands resting on her lap. On the table was a full glass of water. Next to it is a pre-printed form, confirmation of health status and consent to enter protective isolation procedures. At the bottom was a blank space for her signature, a simple act, almost automatic for many. But Angela looked at it like a verdict. The paper didn't ask how she felt, didn't mention the USB, didn't say a word about what she had just been through. It wanted only one thing, her agreement to comply, her silence in the name of safety. The escort, a young woman in a pale blue blouse, stood at an angle by the door. She said nothing. There was something in her eyes, unclear whether it was pity or indifference. Angela didn't try to decipher it. She looked directly at the woman, then lowered her gaze to the paper and then to the glass of water. No one spoke. Time in the room seemed compressed. "Do you want a sign?" the staff member asked, her voice gentle, as if to avoid breaking the room's stillness. Angela didn't respond immediately. She lifted her hand from her lap, placed it on the table, then gently slid the USB out of her pocket, still covered in dust from the platform. She didn't raise it, didn't present it as evidence. She just laid it there, in the light from the window. Then she spoke, not loudly, not with emphasis. "I can survive, but if I do nothing more, everything on this will be dismissed as unverified evidence, and you know that just as I do." The staff member said nothing. Her eyes shifted from the USB to Angela's face, then quietly looked out the window. Her hands lightly gripped the tablet clipped to her waist. She didn't know what to say, or more accurately, she knew very well she wasn't allowed to say anything. Angela understood that silence. She had lived long enough to know everyone has limits within their assigned roles. But she was different. She no longer had time to just play a role. Angela looked out the window. Outside was a gray stone yard, tall steel fences, no trees, no flowers, nothing that hinted at life. A world sealed off from the rest of society, where truth, if not fast enough, would be replaced by organized doubt. "They can't kill me," she said, as if speaking to herself, "but they will kill the evidence. Not with guns, not with hands, but with forms, with directives. They are forcing us to sit here until everything cools down, until no one wants to listen anymore." She picked up the USB again and slipped it back into her pocket. She didn't sign the form. Instead, she asked a question that no one in the room dared to answer. "How many people, do you think, have sat here holding something bigger than themselves and were never heard from again?" The room was silent, and that silence was the clearest proof of everything she had just said. Angela arrived that afternoon, just as the sun began to sink behind rows of abandoned warehouses and rusted power poles. The old shipyard sat off the main road, tucked behind a rotting chain-linked fence. The iron gate stood unlocked, but its hinges bore fresh scratches. She stepped onto the gravel-strewn ground. Her boots scraped against corroded metal, echoing sharply in the silent space. The air was thick with the scent of machine oil, rotting wood, and time itself. Inside, Thomas Reed waited in a sparsely cleared corner, at a worn wooden table flanked by two plastic chairs. He wore a baseball cap, a gray wool scarf, and faded fabric gloves. When he saw Angela, he nodded without rising, less from rudeness than exhaustion. His posture suggested he was accustomed to waiting for people who never came. Now that someone had, he lacked the strength even to feign surprise. Angela set her bag beside the chair without greeting. They had exchanged only one brief email, so she knew his condition well. Her presence here was enough. Thomas retrieved his phone from his coat pocket and typed slowly. On the screen appeared, "They want me to forget, but I cannot forget the scream that day." Angela studied him in silence. No words could answer that. She pulled out the opposite chair and sat facing him. Thomas reached into a canvas bag and produced an old scratched external hard drive. He placed it between them, then traced 3 digits in the air. 2-0-0-0-0, his lips barely moving. She picked up the drive, setting it on her lap, her eyes never leaving his face. The scar on his neck remained visible beneath the scarf, a long, uneven line as if carved during a struggle, not a simple accident. Angela understood that some truths needed no speech. Evidence sometimes lay in a nod, a look, or a silent object on a table. Thomas tapped a few more keystrokes. They never reported that accident, no news bulletin, no official funeral, just a name erased from the roster. Angela bowed her head. She had seen similar cases, but never imagined confronting one so close, at this very moment. Each old story felt like a nail driven into the present, reminding her there was no turning back. Angela retrieved her notebook and jotted a few lines. Thomas watched, then held his phone toward her. "I don't have much time, but you do." Angela pressed her lips together, slipped the hard drive into her bag, and stood. She gripped his hand firmly, not as a farewell, but as a promise. Outside, the wind rose. Tin panels rattled overhead, reminding them their meeting was not an end, but the awakening of a long silence. Angela returned to the shelter as dusk fell. The small room seemed to close in under the dim yellow lamp, casting every corner in shadows of doubt. She didn't switch on the main light. Instead, she placed her bag on the desk, unzipped it, and withdrew the hard drive Thomas had given her. Its plastic shell was worn and scratched, but the port remained intact. She plugged it into her laptop, her hands clenched as the screen displayed a single folder named July Footage. Inside lay one unlabeled video file. No date, no timestamp, only an automatically generated code. Angela clicked. The display went black, then revealed a shaky view from inside a train cabin. The headlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating an endless stretch of track. No voices, just the rhythmic clatter of steel wheels on rails, each rotation like the heartbeat of a cold, relentless machine. The train entered a curve. The light flickered across the ground to the right. 3 figures appeared in view, 2 in police uniforms, the third a young man in a white t-shirt and torn-knee jeans. He swayed, hands held firmly behind him, head thrust forward as if shoved. The scene felt suffocating, as though time itself had frozen while the train bore down. Angela paused the video and rewound it in slow motion. In the next 3 seconds, one officer pressed down harder on the young man's back, while his leg swept out, causing the victim to lose balance and fall backward directly onto the tracks. Angela heard no scream, only the flash of his mouth opening in panic before his body crashed onto the gravel. The train did not stop. The camera shook violently, and the footage cut. When the video resumed, the frame was empty. The 2 officers walked away, backs turned toward a patrol car. Train lights glinted off a dark red stain on the ground. Blood, but no body remained. No emergency response. No cordon, as if the death had never happened. Angela recoiled from the desk, her back hitting the wall. Her breath came ragged, not from fear but from rising anger. She knew this was not an isolated incident, yet the officer's indifference that night sent a chill through her. This was no accident. It was a scripted procedure. Her phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. After I shared this clip with someone inside, they were waiting for me in the lot. I haven't spoken since. Angela sat motionless for a long moment. She understood all too well that Thomas was not the first to lose his voice after speaking the truth. And she knew, if she stopped here, the young man in the video would never appear in any report. The officers who shoved him onto the tracks would don their uniforms, give orders, and move on, unchecked. No one would stop them unless she did. Angela sat at the table, a list of old contacts printed in bold evidence of time's passage before her. The names of those who had stood beside her in past civil rights campaigns were now mostly gone from the field or had chosen silence. Lana Kim was one of the few who had dared confront Mosswood on the front page, but she'd also been the first to vanish after that series ran. Angela tried the old newsroom where Lana had worked, but the voice on the line answered tersely, "She left long ago." No forwarding information. Every social media handle returned an error. Personal website links, even conference-cited articles, disappeared from search results. Shifting tactics, Angela turned to an independent journalism forum where freelancers posted censored stories. In the comments of a 2021 thread, she found an obscure email address marked with the same code Lana once used for reader mail. Uncertain but desperate, Angela sent a brief message. "I stood with you at the 2018 Civil Rights Seminar. I have proof. I don't have much time." 3 days later, a reply arrived from a relay address in the next state. Its only note, "If you are real, come to this address, but alone." No signature, no verification. Angela set out at dawn the next morning. The destination was an aging block of low-rent motels and small repair shops. The air smelled of metal, machine oil, and damp. A silver-faded neon sign flickered over the radio repair shop in front. Behind it, a line of gray brick rooms with seldom opened windows. Angela knocked on door number 7. No bell. She waited, clutching her dossier to her chest. After a moment, the door cracked open. Inside stood a woman in a dark knit cap, chin-length hair, a thick mask, and oversized sunglasses. Her gaze was sharp and wary. When Angela asked, "I'm looking for Lana Kim," the woman replied in an unfamiliar accent, "There's no one here by that name." Angela did not back down. She spoke slowly, her tone low but piercing the distance. "I know you put Mosswood on the front page. You were the only one to call them criminals in uniform." The woman's grip tightened on the doorknob before she snapped the door shut. Silence fell. Angela remained unmoving. 10 minutes later, a scrap of paper slid out beneath the door. In shaky handwriting, like someone asking if they should leave a trace, were the words, "Go around back, alone." Angela picked up the note without glancing around or hesitating. She turned, entered the narrow alley behind the motels, each footstep striking her chest like a drumbeat announcing that she was about to find not just a person, but a piece of truth forced into the shadows. She followed the corridor past mildew-stained walls and rust streaks until a back door stood ajar. No bell, no greeting. Inside lay a cramped room lit by a small skylight. Hard drive boxes, editing rigs, and old computers were stacked against the walls. Seated against one wall was Lana Kim, or whoever she was now, head bowed, hair falling to hide half her face. Lana motioned for Angela to sit without a word. Only after the door was secured with 2 latches did Lana remove her mask and sunglasses. Her face revealed sunken eyes and dark circles. Proof she hadn't slept in years. Lana did not need to ask why Angela had come. She withdrew a crumpled photograph from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. A shot of the threatening note. "We know where you live. Leave Mosswood or vanish from the map." The ink was smeared, as if hurriedly scrawled, but cold enough to freeze the blood of anyone who read it. Lana looked at Angela and said, her voice hoarse but measured, "I thought if I kept writing, justice would follow. But after the office fire and then my boyfriend's accident on the highway, no skid marks, no signs of impact, I realized something else." She stood, poured 2 glasses of water, handed one to Angela, and yet remained standing. "I went too far without a partner," she said, fingers brushing the table's edge as if to steady herself. "So I erased everything. Accounts, name, contacts. Now I survive editing video for local channels, changing address every 3 weeks, never using a personal phone. No one remembers I was a reporter." Lana's laugh was soft, hollow against the concrete walls. Angela placed the USB on the table and slid it toward Lana. "I don't need you to come back," she said, voice low and firm. "I need you to publish what I'm about to show you. This is raw data, untouched. 14 victims, including someone you once knew, Linda Cole." Lana froze. Her water glass halted mid-lift. "Linda Cole?" she whispered. Angela nodded. Her name was scrubbed from the system, but the autopsy, Times photos, they're all here. Lana plugged the drive into her laptop, eyes narrowing at the list of files. When her cursor hovered over 7,125,678 Linda Cole, initial death report, her pupils contracted. "I interviewed Linda's mother. They told me I'd misidentified her, that no one by that name existed in Mosswood's death records. I believed I was mistaken. I believed it." Her fingers clenched. "Turns out they erased her." Angela stayed silent, letting Lana confront the flood of returning memories. After a moment, Lana looked up with resolve. "If I take this public, I'll disappear again, this time maybe forever." Angela met her gaze without flinching. "If you don't, no one will remember victims like Linda." Lana bowed her head, silent. Then slowly she nodded. "All right," she said, barely above a whisper. "I'll do it. But this time I'm not signing my name." Angela crouched before her desk, the thin curtain swaying in the cold draft. On the screen, a series of death codes appeared one after another, soulless symbols carefully encrypted, as if the people behind them had been replaced by cold data strings. She scrolled down, skimming each entry. Most were noted as accidental death, undetermined, or suicide, cause unknown. The 12th line made her stop. Linda Cole. That name struck her like a blow to the forehead. Angela refused to believe it was a mere coincidence. Linda had been her best friend in law school, her companion through those idealistic years. They spent late nights in the library, shared scraps of bread on scholarship, and vowed that if one was oppressed, the other would speak up. Then, Linda vanished. Her death was classified as suicide on the overpass, with no witnesses, no thorough investigation. Angela attended the funeral, but never saw her sealed casket. The family was strangely silent. Even then, she suspected foul play, but had nothing more than a lump in her throat. Now she stared at death code 7,125,678, noting impact from height. Cause undetermined. No external trauma, yet the attached images were nothing but blurs, the result of an AI blurring process Mosswood police had used since 2019. What looked like autopsy photos were digitally distorted, wounds obscured or malformed. Nothing remained intact. Angela dialed Elijah. Her voice trembled, despite her calm tone. "Do you remember Linda Cole, the friend I told you about from college?" Elijah recognized the name immediately. "The one who was going to sue over that gas station shooting?" Angela nodded, though he couldn't see. "Yes, but she's dead. They claim it was an accident, but I have her file now. It wasn't random. I need you to re-examine everything. Autopsy, scene report." Silence on the other end. Elijah sat in the federal office for the Southern District, case files piled around him. Then he replied, voice low, "I'll find it. If they really erased her, I'll recover every detail." Angela hung up, her hand still shaking. Linda had been cast into darkness, but it would not happen again. No one else would disappear. At the Southern Federal Office, Elijah stared at the National Death Registry screen. File 7,125,678 glowed in the top corner, stamped Security Level 3. In its description appeared one line, standardized by federal AI per secure archival protocol. He knew what that meant. Not protection for the dead, but for the living, those hiding something. He opened the Images folder. All files appeared as static images, but instead of clear anatomical shots, there were noise-filled pixels and black blocks covering injured areas. One image could be a head or a shoulder, another looked like ribs or a rail tie. No anchors to identify, no cuts, no bruises left intact. All intentionally blurred. Elijah hovered over each file. The software's intervention had gone too deep. No original image remained. He checked the access log. Last edit 3 years ago. Signed by an internal code from the Office of Forensic Administration. That meant a high-level agency had ordered these images permanently encrypted. No metadata, no timestamp, no GPS coordinates. Every trace erased. Refusing to give up, Elijah sent a request to an independent forensic unit out of state, a team specializing in recovering AI-blurred records. But within 30 minutes he received a reply. Original data sealed by federal directive. No restoration authorized. No one even confirmed whether the originals still existed or had been deleted. Elijah leaned back, eyes fixed on the line. Cause of death: impact from height, undetermined. A programmed conclusion to kill all doubt. He opened a drawer, retrieved an old envelope his mother had given him. Inside was a photograph of 3 people, Angela, Linda, and another friend, taken at graduation. Linda smiled in the photo, hair swept to one side, holding a booklet titled Civil Justice Operation. Elijah gazed at her defiant grin, then muttered as if swearing an oath, "No one is erased, if someone remembered." He knew what faced them was not just blurred data, but a crime, upgraded by technology, protected by power, disguised as a technical error. Elijah shut off the monitor and stood. From now, nothing would stay on those servers. He needed living witnesses. He needed testimonies, and he knew that if Linda Cole could be hidden so thoroughly, the next ones could be his mother and himself. Lana sat, dazed in front of her laptop screen as she discovered the video replayed on multiple television channels. Her image was sharp, every gesture exactly as real. The voice had no difference at all, but every word spoken was a declaration betraying everything she once stood for. I take responsibility for spreading false information about Mosswood. I confirm that the accusations are unfounded. No trembling voice, no hesitation. A deadly blow was delivered by the very image she had painstakingly built. Angela, sitting opposite, suddenly stood up and quickly moved beside Lana as she saw her face grow pale. She didn't need to ask. She had seen the same thing. Lana rewound the video, this time muted, watching only the expressions. The face in the clip was not just similar, it was her. Every blink, every breath. But Angela saw what Lana missed. The shadow, a shadow that did not match the angle of the lighting, and the lip movements in some early frames slipped slightly, not matching the pace of speech. A sophisticated deepfake, created by high-quality AI. "Why now?" Lana asked, voice choked. "Because you just touched the last layer," Angela replied, her eyes sharper than before. "They don't need to kill you. They need everyone to think you sold out." Lana knew she was right. Those following the Mosswood case no longer questioned the truth, they questioned her motives, the reversal of black and white, and the trust misplaced. That very day, she received emails from 2 newsrooms. "We temporarily suspend cooperation until the situation is clarified," a young reporter messaged privately. "What game are you playing?" She did not reply. There was nothing to say to former colleagues, who have now become judges based on an unverified clip. Lana sank to a corner of the house, hands covering her forehead. In her mind were hundreds of possibilities. She had been careful not to reveal her address, not to use a phone with location enabled, and not to have any photos appear online. But now, they could create a new Lana Kim from a few seconds of old interviews and rendering software. No need to approach, no need to threaten. They could destroy the real person through a virtual version. Angela gently pulled down the curtain, cutting the light. She spoke softly, more a statement than advice. "They will continue, but you have something they don't, yourself. In flesh and blood. You are still alive to resist." Lana looked up, exhaling sharply. She had never felt so fragile, but that moment also made her realize she could not retreat. Even if replaced, distorted, or silenced, she still had hands to write and memory to tell. Angela poured a glass of water, placed it in Lena's hand. "We still have one thing they cannot control, the untold truth. And that truth now lay in the USB, placed right in the middle of the table." That very night, Lana's phone rang continuously. Every call carried intimidating voices and warnings. At the end, she received a message from the Mosswood police station. "Request your presence for cooperation in investigating the act of spreading false information, then denying official data." Lana looked at Angela, eyes shimmering with fear mixed with confusion. Her voice trembled. "I cannot go there. I don't know what they will do to me." Angela did not ask more. She stood up, took the car keys from her bag, opened the door, and invited Lana into the car. They said nothing on the way to the new location. When the car stopped in front of an old warehouse hidden in an industrial suburban area, Lana finally asked, "Why are we here?" Angela only nodded, leading her inside. The warehouse once served as a hurricane relief center. Now, only a few folding tents, dusty bottled water crates, and a mobile Wi-Fi hotspot Elijah had delivered remained. The space was cold, but temporarily safer than anywhere Lana had been in recent weeks. They spread an old mattress on the cement floor. Angela switched on the hotspot, creating an anonymous network to avoid tracking. Lana placed her laptop on her lap, sighed, then looked at Angela. "I used to think if I retreated, I would survive. Now I know it was an illusion." She clenched her fist, holding on to the last bit of strength. Angela no longer called Lana reporter as before. Now she called her by name, gently but with weight. "Lana, from now on, you are no longer an outsider. You are a witness." The words were like a silent pact, an acknowledgement that this fight left no room for bystanders. Lana started up her laptop, connected to the hotspot. Angela placed the USB containing the data on the table, lightly turning the hard drive in her hand. "This is the truth, not fake." Lana opened the video editing software, loading the original unedited footage, clips hidden deep in the system. she began reconstructing her reel clip. The first sentence she spoke, clear and steady. "My name is Lana Kim, and I never claimed Mosswood was clean." Each word came out like a vow, a message to millions watching, those who once placed their trust in truth. Angela watched her, eyes shining with resilience. Both knew this was only the beginning. Ahead was a long battle, armed not with guns but with truth and courage. Lana was no longer alone, and this time no one could stay silent. Marcus walked into the Mosswood police station with a mixture of excitement and confusion. Fresh out of the police academy, he had attended a community training class organized by Elijah. That class not only taught skills, but also instilled in Marcus a fierce belief in justice and the responsibility of police officers to society. He once thought that putting on the uniform would make him a defender of righteousness, a bringer of fairness to the oppressed. However, his time working in Mosswood gradually shook that belief. Marcus witnessed many cases being rushed, reports edited to fit scripts predetermined by superiors. Especially when it came to victims of color, his colleagues often avoided or showed discomfort. Once, Marcus asked a close teammate about a case he suspected was tampered with, but the reply was cold silence and a scrutinizing look that made him understand some things were not to be questioned. He felt trapped in a system where loyalty was not a choice but an unwritten law. People chose silence to survive and turned a blind eye to avoid becoming targets. Fear of isolation, losing their job, or facing even graver consequences kept Marcus from speaking out many times. Yet the suspicious glances whenever injustice was mentioned kept gnawing at him. Marcus's mood was like a small boat in a raging current. He wanted to reclaim the values he had learned, to do what was right, but fear held him back. He knew that to change things, someone had to stand as an example. But in this harsh environment, did he have enough courage? Day by day, doubts and pressure weighed on his shoulders, causing Marcus to not only distrust his superiors but also question himself. He realized his silence contributed to the cycle of concealment and deception, but the first step was always the hardest, and Marcus was still waiting for a big enough reason to step out of that darkness. Late at night, the Mosswood station was unusually quiet. Marcus was on duty, the computer screen casting a pale blue light on his tired face. The door to the office quietly opened, and Angela entered. Her presence startled Marcus, but did not surprise him. He knew she would come. Angela looked him straight in the eye, her voice soft yet firm. "Do you know what it feels like to watch someone tied up and be powerless to do anything?" The question rang like an alarm bell, freezing Marcus. Images long buried surged in his mind, scenes of the oppressed, silenced voices, helplessness crushed by peer pressure, and fear of losing his job. Without waiting for an answer, Angela pulled a USB from her pocket and placed it on the table in front of Marcus. "This is what I've gathered," she said, looking directly at him. "The evidence they tried to hide. It's all in your hands now." Marcus lowered his head to look at the USB, feeling the heavy weight. It was not just a data storage device, but the key to the truth he had tried to ignore. Angela placed a hand on his shoulder, encouraging, "Change starts with people like you, those brave enough to face the truth despite the pressure." He felt the weight of those words, the responsibility placed on his shoulders. Marcus stood at a crossroads: continue silent to survive, or stand up against a system he once believed in. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, but also filled with hope. A new battle was beginning, and Marcus had chosen to step in. Elijah sat alone in his office, the pale glow of the computer screen reflecting off his weary, solemn face. Papers and files were piled around him, but his mind was occupied by a heavy, unspoken memory. In his first year at the FBI, driven by inexperience and a desperate need to prove himself, he had been thrust into a situation he never imagined facing. His superiors had exerted immense pressure, forcing him to extract a confession from a black teenager suspected in a serious case. That teenager was innocent, yet Elijah, afraid of losing his position, coerced him into pleading guilty. Whenever he thought of it, it felt like an invisible blade cutting into his heart. The case file, the fabricated statements, the tense interrogations, all wounds he had never shared. He kept them locked in a drawer, as if hiding the darkest secret of his life. Night after night, when everything was quiet, Eleator confronted himself. He saw the teenager in his dreams, heard his anguished cries, saw his stunned face. Before he was compelled to own words that were not his own, those images haunted him, filling him with remorse and guilt, making him want to retreat, to forget the past, but it followed him in every action, every decision. To his colleagues, Elijah was a diligent agent, cautious and responsible, but only he knew how his actions had blurred the image of justice. He never told Angela about that stain. He feared judgment, suspicion, even losing his chance to make amends. Today was different. Looking into Angela's determined eyes, Elijah realized he could no longer carry that burden alone. Some wounds heal only when acknowledged and faced. He began to recount every detail, every tearing emotion. Angela listened without reproach, her understanding profound. Elijah knew he had embarked on a new journey, not only to free himself, but to redeem past wrongs. He realized that an old wound, if not opened, might break him, but could also become the drive to start anew, truly standing on the side of justice, without letting the past dictate his future. Those stories weighed like heavy stones, yet formed the foundation of his awakening. Elijah understood that only by confronting and accepting his wounds could he devote himself to fairer battles, and with Angela's support, he was no longer alone. Darkness still pressed in his office, but deep within him, Elijah sensed a glimmer of light. It was hope for change, not just for himself, but for the system he served. He hoped that this time he would not let the past drag him down, but use it to propel him forward, redeeming himself through present and future actions. Angela did not ask for more. She didn't need to know every misdeed, the names of the superiors who pressured him, or who pushed him into that dark corner. She simply placed a steady hand on his shoulder and said, "Then redeem yourself this time." Her words were not an easy pardon, but a call to responsibility. Elijah knew his mother was no soft touch and would not forgive unless real harm had been made right. Yet today her eyes held no judgment, only trust, a chance to make amends not by words, but by concrete deeds. He sat in silence. Her words, not a command, but sharper than any directive he had ever received, brought clarity. This was his rebirth, where an old stain could become the bedrock of something better if he acted rightly. Elijah began revisiting cases shelved as insufficient evidence or uncontrollable circumstances. He contacted a former colleague who supported AI image analysis, step by step, seeking to retrieve original versions, navigating internal security protocols to access unencrypted records. Angela quietly gathered witnesses. Lana reconstructed tampered video footage. Marcus cross-hacked duty logs with internal data, and Elijah became the hub connecting every piece of truth emerging. He was no longer an agent following orders. He was a man fighting for the truth he once suppressed. One night, seated with Angela in the small room, Elijah pulled out an old ID photo of the teenager he coerced, an innocent face not yet hardened by life. "I cannot change what I did," he said. "But if I fail now, those who were buried will never speak again." Angela looked at the photo and nodded. "Then don't fail," she said, and in her eyes was everything Elijah needed to move forward. Not to redeem himself alone, but because if he didn't act, no one else would dare. Awakening did not come from grand gestures, but from each small choice, like Elijah repurposing the very skills the system taught him to dismantle the lies it wanted to preserve. In a world where justice is often distorted by power, he realized, to make things right, one must have the courage not to turn away from mistake. Night pressed thick against the window, but on his desk the screen glowed with lines of data streaming across. Evidence re-emerging frame by frame, sound clip by sound clip, truths awakening after years of slumber. Elijah no longer hesitated. This time, he would not retreat. Marcus was not a rebel. He was not a hero, but sometimes just standing in the right place at the right time and choosing not to look away was enough to change the whole situation. That night shift began like any other, quiet, stifling, with white lights shining down on the gray tiled floor, and the fan whirring steadily like the lullaby of the system. The Mosswood Police data room was in the basement, completely isolated from the administrative floor above. Only 2 keys granted access. One was in the shift supervisor's office. The other was in Marcus's hand, because he was the only one who accepted the night shift each week. Every night he would check the main server's status, back up data regularly, then sit typing reports until dawn. Everything ran as if nothing was wrong, until he noticed one small detail. Some video clips were missing a few seconds, right at the moment the suspect was being approached, or just after a shouted warning. More importantly, these videos all came from one source: the body cams of Kyle Benson or Drew Carver. At first he thought it was a system error, but then, by chance, while accessing backup history, Marcus found a folder labeled Additional Backup -Unedited from a secondary server. That was the server he had been repeatedly told not to touch. The reason? Unverified data, internal use only, a vague phrase like a curtain hiding the truth. That night, the system reported an automatic maintenance error. A message appeared in the corner of the screen, restoring secondary server, verifying structure. Marcus hesitated for a few seconds, then entered an access code he knew he was not allowed to use. The digital door opened. Inside were the original backup files. No AI blurring, no time for editing. Nothing hidden. He opened a random clip, footage from Kyle's body cam. A low-angle shot, breathless voice. A black teenager was forced to sit on the sidewalk in front of a grocery store. Kyle asked if he was hiding anything. The boy just shook his head. Carver approached and delivered an elbow strike. Then laughter, then silence. The boy collapsed. No resistance, no begging. The clip ended with Kyle glancing at the camera, then it cut off. Marcus couldn't breathe for several seconds. He opened 2 more clips. A man with his hands tied behind his back, trying to scream inside a police car. A woman pushed into a dark alley with no cameras. Each clip was a stab at what was called faith in the law. Official reports described these incidents only as low blood pressure, self-inflicted injury, or unknown cause. Marcus gripped the armrest tightly. He knew if he copied this backup drive, he had crossed a line with no turning back. But doing nothing meant he was part of it, not accidentally, but deliberately. He opened a drawer beneath the control desk, took out an old external hard drive labeled Personal Backup, then started copying, piece by piece, without encryption, without editing. The data was heavy, but heavier was the feeling. It was no longer the Marcus from yesterday. That night, he became a rogue link, and he knew it would not be forgiven. Marcus left the data room with the hard drive in his jacket pocket. He didn't look back or glance at the surveillance cameras along the corridor. Though he knew he had left a trace, he chose not to erase or disguise it. What he needed now was not concealment, but to get the truth to the right people before it disappeared like so many times before. Angela was already waiting in the car behind the pharmacy. The sun had not fully risen, but the dim morning light was enough to reveal the dark circles and dry lips on her face. When Marcus opened the door and sat in the passenger seat, she didn't ask anything. She just looked straight ahead and held out her hand. He placed the hard drive in her palm, then sat quietly. What he had just done, if discovered, meant losing his job, possibly his freedom. But inside him was not fear, but relief. For the first time in months, he felt he was no longer silent within that rotten system. Angela checked the hard drive, confirmed the file format. She pulled from her pocket a small round encryption device about the size of a coin, dull metallic color, no logo, no label. It was the device she had mentioned to Elijah but never used. It worked by simultaneously recognizing 3 factors: fingerprint, voice, and heartbeat. Each time it unlocked, it created a temporary key that self-destructed after 60 minutes. She connected the device to the hard drive, then pressed her finger down. A soft click sounded. The screen displayed a simple command: creating new encryption. She confirmed, then spoke slowly in a steady voice. Angela Brooks, confirming Mosswood data storage. Then she clipped the device onto a necklace she wore around her neck. Inside the black stone pendant lay the microchip with the code. Marcus looked at her as if seeing a kind of faith he had never believed in. Not faith in law nor justice, but faith that a mother could do what no one dared to do because she had lost a friend and could not let that happen to anyone else. Angela pulled her collar up to cover the pendant, then turned to Marcus. From now on, I don't have it. I only carry it. If I don't unlock it again within 3 days, it will automatically send all contents to the Department of Justice via encrypted satellite. She didn't wait for a response. If I disappear, tell Elijah that this time, I won't let them erase everything like they did with Linda. Marcus nodded, silent. Bitter feelings stirred inside him. He had thought he was just a technician, an outsider. But the moment he saw the teenager knocked down and ignored in reports, he knew that line no longer existed. Angela started the car, backed out of the lot, then disappeared into a street still closed for business. Marcus stood for a few more minutes, watching the direction she had gone. The silence of early morning was not peace, but a sign of a storm held back only by a few data files and a necklace. 3 days, no more. That was the limit Angela gave herself. No one knew what she would do next. But Marcus knew one thing. If she failed, what he gave her would become the final indictment. Undeniable, unhidden, and never buried again. It was not a plan, nor a campaign. It was a silent promise. And with a system so used to silent screams, sometimes silence was what scared it most. Angela did not often rely on anyone, especially in matters like this. But as the data in her hands began to transform into a bomb capable of toppling a network whose depth she could not yet measure, she knew she needed someone not only with status, but also with memory. Not the mechanical memory of a document storage system, but the memory of someone who once knew exactly what made a wrongful verdict legally signed. The only person she could think of was Avery Castillo. Back when Avery was a community lawyer, they had stood together in a campaign to force district police departments to open files to civilian oversight committees. Avery was young, sharp, and impatient, but full of justice. Angela had seen her enter the courthouse with hands trembling from anger, not fear. She had heard Avery argue before internal affairs boards, witnessed the look in her eyes when a ruling was delayed due to insufficient evidence despite After that case, Angela had given Avery supplemental testimony that forced the board to reopen the file. Thanks to that, an officer who had beaten a suspect to death in a holding cell was prosecuted. Since then, they had bonded as two halves of the same disappointment in the so-called reform. Later, Avery rose to become a state prosecutor, then a district attorney. She appeared less often, no longer spoke publicly, nor responded to emails from organizations she once supported. But Angela understood. Some positions in the system, if one wants to change it from within, require learning to keep silent longer than most can endure. Still, Angela believed that LVU from before had not disappeared. She opened her contacts and scrolled down to an unnamed number. That fixed line belonged only to Avery, not an official number. No call screening. Angela pressed the call button. The screen showed the connection icon. 1 beep, 2, 3, no answer. No voicemail, no busy signal, no forwarding. As if the number had become a relic of an old relationship no longer active. She waited a minute, then called again. Same result. Angela hung up, sat still. Fingers rested on her lap, still as stone. In her mind appeared the image of Avery standing in the courthouse yard years ago, beneath a blazing red maple tree in late autumn, telling her, "The silence of a prosecutor kills more people than a stray bullet." Avery said that when she was still outside the system. Now, she herself was silent. Angela wondered if everyone who climbed higher had to leave a part of their heart in places like this. She did not blame Avery, not yet, at least, because sometimes delay is just a way people step back to see if they still have other options. But this time, Angela knew clearly there was no backup plan. No one else could step forward without being crushed, and if someone like Avery did not show up, No one inside the system could open the door from within. Angela looked at the phone once more, then placed it face down on the table. The ringtone was silent. The light from the window shifted completely to gray. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled softly. The feeling was not quite disappointment, nor despair, simply a clear realization. A door once ajar had closed, and she, once again, stood outside. But that had never stopped her from knocking one more time. Angela opened her laptop. Disconnected from the network, not log in with her main account. She used a backup mailbox created years ago, known by only 3 people. One of them was Avery Castillo. She did not send an attachment, no attention-grabbing subject, no keyword overuse that could trigger system filters. The content she needed to transmit was confined to a single paragraph, shorter than any petition they had ever drafted together. "Avery, I called but did not hear your voice. Maybe you were busy. Maybe you chose silence. I am not sending this email to blame you, only to remind you that I still remember. You were the one standing in courtrooms where no audience sat. You dared to say no when other prosecutors bowed their heads. You told me silence is the dirtiest language of power. If I die, you will see your name among those who could have stopped it. I do not need a reply. I only need you to remember." Angela typed slowly, word by word. No edits, no rereads. What she wrote was to send, not to wait for a response. When the cursor blinked at the end of the line, she hit send. A brief pause. The system confirmed the email was sent successfully. She closed the laptop, removed the battery, wrapped it in a cloth, and stored it in a compartment under the wooden floor. Outside, the wind began to strengthen. The trees in front of the porch struck the glass door. A black cloud drifted slowly across the silver-gray sky, signaling the weather would not remain calm much longer. Angela pulled her coat tighter, adjusted the collar, and checked the left pocket where her pendant remained intact. Every step she took now was carefully calculated, yet still uncertain. That did not make her hesitate. It made her more alert. She stood before the mirror, observing her face in the dim light. The face no longer bore the softness of a civil secretary, nor the caution of one who spoke only when permitted. That face now belonged to a living witness, carrying the truth, needing no permission to exist. In her coat pocket, the phone did not vibrate. No messages, no sign that Avery had read the email, much less replied. Angela was not disappointed. The nature of such messages needing no reply is to remind the recipient that even if they choose to stand still, someone still remembers, and if tomorrow someone asks whether she had called, sent the final message, the answer would be yes, clear, without evasion. Angela opened the door. The wind rushed in, cold and sharp as a blade. She stepped outside, locked the door, and did not look back. Each step was light but firm. She knew hesitation was no longer allowed. Ahead lay a series of decisions with no retreat, and among the things to be done, Avery was only a small branch. If she could return, perhaps they would talk. If not, Angela believed that message was enough to make the rest begin to turn on their own, or no one would be able to claim they were never warned. Angela received the message late in the afternoon, just after leaving the community center where a secret meeting with a group of independent lawyers had taken place. The message had no sender's name, only a temporary number displayed. The brief text read, "Someone at the station will transfer more data to you. Meet at warehouse number 9, Morningside area. Bring no one." A message like that, at such a time, could mean only 2 things. Either the source was real, or a trap cleverly set to trigger trust. Angela was not one to trust easily, but she also knew that some opportunities, if not seized, would disappear forever. She took a screenshot, encrypted it in a hidden folder, and then deleted the message from her phone. The name Marcus briefly flashed in her mind, but she did not call him. Elijah was also not an option at that moment. She only brought along the necklace containing a copy of the data. The main hard drive had been double-locked and stored securely in a safe at a location she had never mentioned to anyone. Warehouse number 9 was at the end of a row of abandoned storage buildings near an old gas station closed for many years. The Morningside area had few passers-by, especially at dusk. She arrived in a car borrowed from a friend in the community organization, parking a distance away before walking. Outside, no strange vehicles, no suspicious sounds. But the silence there made her feel like she was stepping into a frozen frame of a film whose cameraman had long left. The warehouse door was unlocked. Angela pushed it gently. The hinge creaked like a sigh. No lights inside. The only illumination came from a gap in the warped metal roof. Inside, a few old crates were piled haphazardly. On top of one wooden box was a flip phone. Outdated, but still lit. The screen displayed exactly 4 words. "Take it, go." She stepped forward, just touching the phone, when footsteps echoed on the concrete floor behind her. 2 men closed in from opposite sides without a word. One gripped her left hand tightly, the other squeezed her shoulder. She struggled instinctively but was pulled back, losing momentum. Her body bumped lightly against the crate's edge, pain sharp but not enough to knock her down. One of them pulled out a nylon zip tie, wrapped it around her wrist and tightened it. "Stay calm," the man said in an even tone, not threatening, as if just doing a simple task for the day. Angela was shoved outside, pressed against a pickup truck parked behind the warehouse. She did not see the driver until the front door opened. Kyle Benson stepped out, his face expressionless. He didn't look at her immediately. He adjusted his sleeve, checked his phone, then turned to her. "I thought you knew when to stop," he said without smiling. "But you still think someone will believe you? They won't come. Not this time." Angela said nothing. She let them push her into the back seat. The door slammed shut. In that moment, she realized she was not being followed for what she held, but for what they feared she might trigger. Her existence was a risk, not the evidence. The vehicle left the warehouse, crossing a dirt road leading to the outskirts. No cars followed. No signs. Only dust rose behind the tires. And inside her, an old feeling returned. The feeling of someone who had once said goodbye to a close friend with an investigation conclusion she never trusted. This time, she did not intend to let it happen again. Angela was pulled out of the car with enough force to scrape her knees on the rough gravel. The sky had darkened. The wind was no longer gentle but carried dust and cold air, whipping sharply against her face. She was pushed close to the edge of a rail track, the junction between 2 disused branches, though occasionally technical trains passed irregularly. She had read about this place in a report about last year's accident, a case no one spoke of, no one complained about, because the victim was unidentified. Angela remembered clearly, and now she stood exactly there. Kyle gave no orders. The other man pulled her down, tied fabric straps around her wrists and ankles, then draped them over the cold rail. Angela's hands went numb. The ties were not chains, but were tied with the expertise of those who had done this more than once. Kyle stepped forward, bent down. His eyes no longer held the mocking gleam from before. Now they were empty, as if every expression had been drained by the system he served. "No one's coming," he said calmly. "Don't expect anyone to rush in like an action movie this time." Angela did not resist. She knew what would happen if she screamed. No houses nearby, no cameras, no reason to prove she had been here. She just looked him in the eye. "You won't kill me," she said slowly, "because I died once. When Linda was pushed from the balcony, I died then, and the one standing here now is the remainder you haven't crushed yet." Kyle chuckled softly, but then stood up and stepped back a few paces. The train was unannounced. No horn, no headlights, but the metallic sound from afar had begun to reverberate on the ground. The man with Kyle whispered something, then both stepped aside, eyes never leaving Angela. They did not intend to guard, they intended to observe. And then they left. The train's sound grew closer. Angela lay sideways, her cheek pressed against the cold stone. Her mind no longer spun files, names on lists, or people she had written letters to. She only thought of one thing, whether it was enough to survive this moment, or at least to be found, even if late. Just as the train screeched like tearing metal, another sound echoed across the tracks. The sound of wheels sliding on dirt. Then a vehicle door flung open. A figure rushed toward her. No shout, no warning. The person jumped down into the ditch, rolled forward, then cut the ties with a few swift knife strokes. Angela did not catch the face, only felt a strong arm wrap around her, pulling her back from the rails. The wind from the train swept up dirt, sand, and gravel, whistling like a gale from elsewhere. Angela coughed violently, half lying on the body of the one who had saved her. When she lifted her head, her eyes met a familiar face. Not Elijah. No badge. No gun was drawn as evidence. It was Marcus, the one who had been silent on shift, only standing by the cameras, the one who had been afraid to speak the truth. And now, the one who pulled her back from the brink of life and death without waiting for orders. They both stood as the train disappeared around the bend. Kyle was gone. No sound, no shadow, only the aftershock still echoed in the palm of Angela's trembling hand. Marcus placed his hand on her shoulder, eyes fixed on the direction the train had gone. "I tracked your car's GPS," he said softly. "I know they won't leave you alone, but I also know this time I can't just watch from behind a screen." Angela nodded. She said, "No thanks." Between them, it was unnecessary. In that moment, what they shared was not a favor. It was acceptance. That everyone, no matter how long they stay silent, has a time to stand on the right side. And sometimes, one timely stand is enough. Lana sat before her screen, hands poised over the keyboard, but typing nothing. She had edited the video 3 times, rewritten its headline 6 times, trimmed every personal commentary, leaving only raw footage, unvarnished audio, and indisputable data. Yet the upload bar froze at its final %. A bright red warning appeared on a white background. File blocked due to community guidelines violation, error code 19. No explanation, no appeal instructions, no support link. Just a cold, full stop. She tried again. Server connection error. Lana switched VPNs. First Switzerland, then South Korea, but the result was unchanged. The system seemed programmed to recognize precisely the kind of evidence she was exposing, then extinguish it before it could spread. Sitting up straight, she breathed deeply and pulled out her phone. She messaged 3 veteran collaborators who had joined her on past international investigations. "Test this link now. Urgent." 1 minute later, 2 replied. 404, not found. The third had vanished. His account erased. Lana sat in silence for a few seconds, then retyped the link. Exactly the same. Still inaccessible. Angela stood behind her, eyes fixed on the error message. She had been there since the upload began and said nothing. No progress inquiries, no soothing words. She simply watched, knowing Lana had done everything she could. Lana leaned back, hands pressed to her temples. "They don't block everything," she whispered, voice tight with exhaustion. "They block exactly the right person at exactly the right moment." Angela nodded quietly. "They don't need to destroy the system," she replied. "They just need to make the system choose not to see." Lana unplugged the drive and closed her laptop. They learned to silence not with force, but with quiet. She looked up, her anger gone, replaced by a ruthless clarity. "That's why you printed everything." Angela unzipped her bag and pulled out the printed files. Multiple copies. She handed Lana a slim folder bound in pale blue. "If I can't make it, give this to Marcus." No further explanation was needed. Lana understood. Night had fallen. Outside the window, yellow street lamps flickered on in government buildings. Another day was ending, but not all days end the same. Some nights close with a faint news brief, others with someone who never returns. Lana did not ask where Angela was headed next. She knew the woman would not sit still another night. Those files could not linger in hard drives, the cloud, or code throttled by invisible community policies. They needed voices, spoken aloud. Angela stood, donned her coat, and checked the lock on her encrypted pendant. Lana watched, then said, "I'll stay, but if you don't make it back by morning, I won't stay silent." Angela paused at the door, voice carrying in the darkened room. "If I don't return, tell them I chose not to vanish like the others." With that, she stepped out, leaving behind the glow of the darkened screen and someone who had lost faith in platforms but still believed in the power of direct speech. Angela waited outside the hearing room for nearly 10 minutes before the usher opened the door and invited her in. The corridor to the room was barely 10 meters long, yet each step felt as heavy as traversing 4 seasons. Fragments of memories, of Linda, of Jamal, of Thomas, flashed through her mind like reverse-played film reels, but Angela kept her back straight and her gaze forward. She wore dark clothing, her hair neatly bunned, her face bare of makeup, and on her lapel a white badge reading "Voluntary Witness," a small detail, yet a reminder to everyone present. She was not compelled to be here. She chose to appear. She chose to stand here, and she had something to say. The hearing room sat on the third floor of the State Administrative Building, modest, not like the grand halls on television. Low ceiling, soundproofed walls, warm yellow lights, no reporters, no cameras beyond the internal recording system. To the left, a long bench with 5 light-shirted officials bent over their files. To the right, a single chair for the speaker. In the center, a microphone with a red signal light. Only lit when speaking was permitted, the chair did not introduce her. He looked up and spoke in a voice like an old tape recorder. Witnesses have 3 minutes. Do not repeat submitted testimony, avoid offensive language, and do not disrupt proceedings. Ms. Brooks, you may speak. Angela approached the small wooden podium, hands resting lightly on its edges, her fingers unshaking, yet gripping ever so slightly. She carried no papers. She did not intend to read from a script or pause for missing words. The red light on the mic signaled that recording had begun. She began calmly, "I am not here to accuse anyone. I wish to share 3 stories." Her voice was almost too soft to launch a hearing, yet in that space her words cut like a blade on still water, quiet, but holding the entire room breathless. The note-taken pen stilled. The chair's glasses froze mid-slide. Silence fell. Angela continued without checking her watch. 3 people, 3 circumstances, 3 deaths. Their common bond is not race or profession, but dying in the indifference of a system that deemed them unworthy of protection. She did not raise her tone, nor stare challengingly at the board, yet something in her stance forced each sentence into an unanswerable pause. No accusations, no calls for punishment, merely the presence of names forgotten by all. Each story was like placing a stone at the bottom of a dry well, deep, weighty, with no telling when one would hit bottom. The mic was recorded on, the clock ticked forward. In those 3 brief minutes, Angela did not indict, she opened a door. Behind it was a system everyone knew existed, but none dared name. Until she entered this room and spoke, she paused, after her opening line, not to gather breath, but to ensure every person here truly listened. No broadcast lights pointed at her. No one was required to note her every word. Yet that absence gave each word the heft of the unerasable. She began. Her story. My old friend Linda Cole. We shared a dorm. Linda recorded every community meeting she managed. In 2011, she was ruled a suicide in her apartment. The report showed no abnormal signs, just a note verified as her handwriting. Angela looked down, then up again. But I still have Linda's message from 3 days before. I think someone knows I have those recordings. I may have to leave for a while. Linda never contemplated death, but no one believed her. No one reviewed her tapes. Now, no one remembers her name. She paused, and the room seemed to contract. Second story. Jamal Thompson, 16, a high schooler. He was shoved by 2 officers near a Mosswood convenience store. I watched that video over and over again. He tried to speak. He was pushed onto active tracks. The final report stated, accident due to sudden fainting. No mention of injury. No sign of violence, no internal inquiry. Angelette's tone did not waver, but her eyes fixed on an unseen point in the distance. Without that video, Jamal would remain a mere error in the system. He had no chance to explain, because no one thought him worth listening to. A few pens lifted, then dropped again. Someone shifted in their seat, but no one interrupted. Angela spoke softly. Final story. Thomas Reed. He was a train operator who provided me with the cabin footage, the only proof of Jamal's death. Thomas never spoke again. After sharing the video internally, he was accosted in the parking lot and his larynx was broken. No arrests, no complaints accepted. Who was Thomas? A low-level technician, unimportant to a system that only listens to the voices of power. She paused, looking around the room. I do not share these stories to persuade you. I share them to ask, will those robbed of their voices ever be heard, or will we let them slip into permanent silence? The mic's red light blinked off. The room fell into near absolute quiet. No applause, no note-taking. Faces once solemn now looked adrift. Angela, without waiting for a response, quietly stepped away from the podium, knowing she had said all that needed saying. Elijah remained seated, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the black stone pendant in his hand. The small room at the Witness Protection Center held nothing but a desk, a folded cot, and a weak yellow lamp. Everything here was kept minimal to avoid distracting the occupant. But inside his head, there was nothing minimal, only a complex chain linking his mother, the system, and the truth under siege. Angela vanished after an unexpected hearing. No one knew her next steps, but Elijah understood. If his mother was silent, it was not the end. It was a purposeful pause. And what she left behind, the necklace worn under her shirt every day, was a message without words, an urgent message in physical form. He detached the device, placed it on the desk, and connected it to the integrated decoder. Electricity passed through, casting a thin light along the device's edge. No screen, no buttons, only a sound signal, then a mechanical voice evenly said, "Identity confirmed, Angela Brooks. Secondary access, cross-log. Please read the decryption code." Elijah held his breath for a second, then said, "If you hear this, it means Mom trusted no one else to keep her promise." A soft click sounded like a lock opening somewhere unseen. On the connected laptop screen, 3 files appeared, nothing remarkable in appearance. Simple file name, lowercase, no metaphor. Report doc, note, G-edge, call. He opened the text first. The opening lines were ordinary. A list of victims, dates of death, officers handling the cases. But scrolling to the end, he found a note encrypted by a reverse algorithm, split into fragments to avoid automatic detection by software. Elijah entered the secondary decoder. Words surfaced as if rising from the depths of a lake. All original data was intentionally excluded from the official report. All edits went through the same internal IP address. The final line chilled him. IP address registered to a personal device used by Sheriff Callahan. He closed the document and opened the image. It was a handwritten letter from Angela. Slanted but clear. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer somewhere you can reach. But you don't need to find me. I have lived out the part I believed was right. What you must do now is preserve what remains. No tears, no farewell. Only a clarity so painful it seemed Angela wrote not as a mother, but as a citizen, accepting what the system would do to those who dared cross its limits. Elijah inhaled deeply. He opened the last file, but hesitated to play it immediately. His hand hovered over the play button. A long silence stretched. In his mind, he replayed his mother's voice from their last conversation. Not everyone born into the system is obliged to keep silent about it. Then he pressed play. The first voice was not his mother's. It was a man's. Deep and clear. The words were simple, like an internal broadcast. You know it. Keeping the black arrest rate high enough keeps the community security funds flowing. More crime reports mean more budget justification. Numbers that listen. Elijah sat still. It was Sheriff Callahan's voice, unmistakably. But what made him shudder was not the words, but how casually and naturally he spoke, as if it were normal. Even reasonable. No shame in a system turning skin color into numbers, no shame in using those numbers to enrich budgets and reputations. He saved the file in 3 copies. One of the federal internal storage systems, one encrypted to Lana Kim, one he kept on his personal device. Elijah knew what he had just opened was not only legal evidence, it was moral proof, and anyone who heard it and stayed silent had chosen a side. And this time, ignorance would no longer be an excuse. Elijah sat motionless for several minutes after the recording ended. No other sounds in the room except the faint hum of the ventilation fan and a lump in his throat he could not name. It was neither anger nor fear, It was the silent awareness that truth, when spoken by its manipulator, was even more chilling than a gunshot. He replayed the recording, fast forward to the end, then wrote in his notebook, "The more black arrests, the more funds flow. Numbers that listen." Callahan's voice was steady, indifferent like a weather forecast. Elijah listened 3 more times, not out of doubt, but to imprint the voice and tone. These details, when exposed publicly, would not just be facts. They would be tools to block every path of denial. Soon after, he called a federal encryption line. The other end responded with Open Data Transfer Gate. Elijah sent the original recording, along with the verified audio signature document. When done, he opened an encrypted email and drafted a message to Lana Kim. He didn't write much, only a subject line. For the final publication, if I am cut off from the system, attached was the file. Lana was the only one, besides him, whom Angela trusted not to bargain with the truth. Elijah believed this not because Lana was a journalist, but because she had been silent at the right times. Such a person, once deciding to speak out, rarely turned back. After sending, Elijah pulled a small USB from his jacket pocket, plugged it into the secondary backup device. He did not forget his mother's words. Every copy we keep is another chance for the system not to bury it. When all copies were saved, he leaned back, closed his eyes. In the darkness, images piled up like overlapping shards. Linda Cole lying motionless on the sidewalk, the teenager kicked down. His mother's testimony, Marcus secretly pulling the hard drive at night, and now, Sheriff Callahan speaking of black people as a planned budget asset. Elijah understood what he held was not just evidence. It was the involuntary confession of a mechanism sustained by the invisibility of numbers. And once that voice was exposed, the system would do everything to eliminate the one who stirred it. But this time, he was not alone. Angela had planned every move as if she knew the enemy's every reaction. Marcus had taken to risk with his career to open a path. Lana was ready to return, not for a story, but for a duty stolen many years ago. Elijah stood up. He opened a drawer, took out his badge. For the first time in weeks, he pinned it to his chest pocket. It was no longer just a federal agent's card, but proof he once believed in the system, and now he would use that status to expose it, not for revenge, not for honor, but to prove that an ordinary mother, without guns or power, could make the system tremble with a single recording. Tomorrow, Elijah would speak out, but today he quietly preserved the last thing his mother left behind, a statement, unspoken, that truth, if repeated, will never die. Meeting room number 4 of the state parliament was located on the top floor of the building, a place where sunlight struggled to filter through the high, narrow windows. The air inside carried a heavy scent, a mixture of old paper, polished wood, and the intangible weight of prolonged anticipation that seemed to settle permanently in the room. Angela arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a neat black briefcase, deliberately unbranded and free of any logos that might draw attention. The usher at the door did not recognize her, nor did he ask any questions beyond the routine check of her ID and recording her name into the attendance register. She was then quietly directed to take a seat in the row reserved for independent citizen speakers, positioned among polished wooden benches that gleamed softly under the dim lighting, and framed by frosted glass walls that muffled the outside noise and conversations from the hallway. When the session officially began, 3 legislative representatives entered the room with purposeful steps, each bearing a thick stack of documents and folders under their arms. There were no formal introductions, no explanation about why Angela had been invited. The representatives simply nodded to one another and exchanged subtle glances, signaling with their eyes that Angela could begin her presentation. Without hesitation, Angela stood, walked steadily to the wooden table in front of her, and gently placed her briefcase down. She took a moment to unlock it slowly, the subtle click of the lock echoing softly in the quiet room. Inside, she revealed nothing more than a thin file and a single folded A4 sheet carefully tucked into a separate compartment. Her voice, when she began to speak, was clear and precise. neither raised nor embellished with dramatic flair. "My name is Angela Brooks. I have a proposal concerning the responsibility of maintaining death records within the state criminal justice system." One of the three representatives shifted forward slightly, leaning in with a hint of interest, while the other two remained focused on the papers before them, or discreetly glanced at the time on their wristwatches. Angela pressed on without pausing for a response. "The data I previously submitted to the Department of Justice reveals that over the past 12 years, this state has recorded at least 27 deaths related to law enforcement activities. Yet, the internal investigation files have been systematically rearranged to misrepresent the true causes of these deaths." She carefully opened the file, withdrawing the folded paper, and spread it neatly across the table in front of the council. "I am not here to discuss criminal liability. I do not seek prosecution or retribution. Instead, I propose a solution to restore the administrative presence of those deliberately erased from official records." Handing the list to the clerk for recording, she watched as the paper, bearing 27 names printed in a uniform font with ample spacing for clarity, was taken. There were no case numbers and no details regarding the circumstances of death, only the full names, dates of birth, and Angela's closing note at the bottom. Data classified as insufficient grounds for further investigation. One member of the council lifted his eyes and scrutinized Angela with a steady, penetrating gaze. She met his look calmly and steadily. Such evaluations were nothing new to her. Continuing with steady resolve, she said, "I propose the establishment of an independent oversight body under the jurisdiction of the state parliament, to be called the Committee for the Nameless. This body's mission would be to review death files previously closed due to lack of evidence, to verify identities, circumstances, and timing, and to update the victim's official administrative records accordingly." Angela did not pause to seek immediate endorsement or applause. She knew well that a proposal of this nature would not be greeted with enthusiasm. But she also understood that if the idea was planted deep enough within a system designed to conceal inconvenient truths, it could eventually sprout the first cracks. "Not to accuse," she added, locking eyes with the only person in the room who appeared truly attentive, "but to confirm that those who once existed will no longer be wiped from the documents as if they never existed. There is no longer anyone waiting for justice, but many still wait to be recognized as real." The clerk removed her headset, peering at Angela with an expression as though she was considering whether this statement merited classification as a valuable opinion in the official record. Meanwhile, a council member quietly folded his papers, placed his pen on the desk, and his expression was unreadable and impassive. Angela slowly placed the file back down on the table and stepped away from the podium. "I come without legal representation, without organizational backing, without any funding requests. I only leave this list. If verification is required, I have copies of the data available." No one in the room rushed to respond. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting slanted beams onto the dark stone walls, creating a solemn and almost sacred atmosphere. A silence settled, not tense, but heavy, where each person seemed to weigh the significance of recording a name against the effort and resistance such an act would face within this entrenched system. Angela gave a subtle nod, then turned and left the podium. Whatever unfolded next, she knew she had done her part. Those whose names were on that list would no longer be mere statistics or omitted numbers. They had names once again, and this time no one would be able to erase them with the click of a mouse inside internal databases. Angela had not yet reached the exit when a voice rose quietly from the upper rows of seats. It was neither loud nor skeptical, but calm, the tone typical of those accustomed to asking ritualistic questions as part of formal administrative proceedings. "Do you really believe that will change anything?" Angela stopped in her tracks. The question did not surprise her, but it came from the very person she least expected to hear speak, the senior council member who had held numerous supervisory roles within the justice system and was known for his resolute neutrality, often to the point of leaving no discernible mark. He did not lean toward any faction, and, perhaps because of that, His words carried weight and commanded the attention of all present. She turned around and met his eyes directly. The moment stretched for no more than 3 seconds, but in that brief time, the entire room fell silent. The clerk paused the recording device. The other 2 council members lifted their heads. Angela did not return to the podium. She remained where she stood, silent for a brief moment before speaking again, her voice calm and firm. "I do not delude myself into thinking that forming a committee will change history," she said steadily. "I do not believe it will correct wrongful convictions or force the powerful to bow before justice." Holding the list in her hand, she raised it slightly to underscore her next words. "But if this system was once most effective at making people disappear using legal language, then now is the time for us to learn how to record them properly, not to resurrect them, but to ensure they are never buried a second time." Her words concluded, and a heavy silence settled over the room. There was no applause, no nods, yet the questioner's eyes lost their former sharpness. He regarded the list with a gaze as if reading each name not as mere letters, but as traces of individuals who had passed through the very system he once oversaw. Angela did not wait for a response. She placed the list back on the table, carefully folded the file, and walked out of the room. Her footsteps were soft, yet the weight of her presence lingered enough for everyone to sense they had just heard something profoundly different from the usual budget plans or political campaigns that typically filled this chamber. It was a gentle but deep reminder. Every erased name leaves a void that silence can never truly fill. As Angela reached the end of the corridor, the records clerk hurried after her, asking if she would leave any contact information. She handed over a slip of paper without phone numbers or email addresses, only a brief note. "If you decide to remember their names, I will know." Then she stepped outside, disappearing quietly into the calm, windless late afternoon. Behind her, the meeting room's lights remained on, but from this day forward, on their table lay a list, and within that list every single name became a question, a challenge the system could no longer afford to silence forever. That morning, the town of Mosswood awoke to an unusual, tense silence. There were no sirens blaring in the distance, no crowds gathering in protest, and no one standing vigil outside the police station. Yet, every phone screen and every news page flashed the same name, Mosswood. A headline on a local news website, usually ignored or buried beneath the noise of daily headlines, suddenly spread like wildfire, gaining unprecedented attention. Cut cameras, edited data. Who holds the switch to the truth? The article opened with a brief 15-second audio clip. A deep male voice chuckled softly before stating plainly, "The more black arrests, the more funds flow." Numbers that know how to obey. There was no identification of the speaker, no accompanying image, but those familiar with internal circles instantly recognized the voice. Anyone who had heard him command briefings knew every nuance, especially the way he ended sentences with a nasal breath. Even those who had never met him quickly identified the name behind that voice, Callahan. Within 6 hours, the video clip had been reposted on more than 10 major news channels across the country. Commentators rapidly dissected the data. National television screens began displaying arrest statistics over the past 3 years, highlighting troubling patterns. Suspicion blossomed, spreading from that single audio clip to a wider investigation into numerous cases, closed prematurely due to insufficient evidence. That very afternoon, Lana Kim made her first public television appearance in nearly 2 years, since withdrawing from the mainstream media. She wore no suit, presented no slides, and made no elaborate statements. She simply sat with a file placed before her and a gaze that refused to avoid the camera's scrutiny. She began bluntly, "They used to call these deaths statistics, but today we name each person." Lana held up a copy of the Unnamed Persons Committee list. No analysis, no plea for sympathy. Then she played a short video excerpt from data Marcus had secretly backed up, a police officer kicking a black teenager forcefully in the chest. Then, turning away without a backward glance. The video ended with no special effects or captions. However, in the final 5 seconds, a keen observer could clearly see that the clock's narrative displayed the wrong date and time, a glaring and undeniable proof that the footage had been deliberately tampered with. Lana stared directly into the camera lens. If data obeys, then now is the time to teach it to speak the truth. By the next morning, news agencies had successively adjusted their approach. What started as doubts about the authenticity of the audio clip grew into full-fledged investigations into deaths hastily closed. Articles previously removed or censored from news outlets were restored. Local reporters were dispatched to Mosswood to interview the families of the victims. Social media erupted with hashtags commemorating forgotten names and demanding accountability. Inside the Mosswood Police Headquarters, a security monitor in the surveillance room displayed a stark message: premium access temporarily locked, awaiting federal court order. Not a single person in the room spoke, yet the weight of unspoken understanding settled heavily. The situation was no longer under their control. A door had been forced open, and this time the smokescreen was too thin to obscure the faces of those once erased from view. The ensuing press conference was held not in the grand main hall, but in a modest room tucked behind the state prosecutor's office. No flags adorned the walls, no sponsor logos marked the podium, only a simple wooden lectern against a plain gray wall, with orderly rows of chairs awaiting the press. Invitations had been sent just hours before, addressed to investigative journalists who had been present from the very first day the Mosswood case erupted. No one knew exactly what to expect, but the speaker's name alone drew a full house. Avery Castillo stepped confidently onto the podium, her posture firm but showing subtle signs of fatigue. Her face was bare, hair neatly tied low at the nape of her neck. She stood straight, carrying no documents or slides, without aides or assistants. All eyes focused solely on her. 3 years ago, Avery began, when I was appointed state prosecutor, I believed that change from within was a slow but worthwhile journey. I believed that careful caution and timely silence could allow me to fight the system in the long term. Her voice was steady, slightly hoarse from weeks of speaking. But reality has proven otherwise. Silence, in some cases, is nothing more than complicity with wrongdoing. She looked up, fixing her gaze directly into the live broadcast camera. I have reviewed all the data transferred by Angela Brooks. I have examined recordings, legal files, and especially the edits removed from the original Mosswood police footage. I confirm there is clear evidence of record manipulation, concealment of evidence, and misuse of data to distort reality. Some reporters flipped rapidly through their notebooks. Others raised their heads, struck unexpectedly by the gravity of her words. But Avery pressed on without hesitation. Today, I sign criminal charges against former police chief Samuel Callahan on 3 main counts: abuse of power, falsification of legal data, and complicity in systematic violence against unarmed citizens. She raised the indictment in front of the cameras as shutters clicked rapidly. And I will not stop there. Related individuals will be summoned in the coming days. The Mosswood Support Fund will also be fully audited for the past 3 years. The room thickened with tension. Some journalists remained calm, diligently taking notes. Others stared at Avery as if witnessing for the first time an official daring to step outside the system's protected boundaries and accept responsibility. Avery concluded with a line absent from any prepared script. Not because I want to be a hero, but because I understand better than anyone how silent this system has been when it should have spoken. When she stepped down, no applause followed. Yet in many eyes, something had shifted. Not all, but enough to ignite a chain reaction. In that moment, the woman once regarded as a symbol of compromise became the spark for transparency, as the smoky fragments once shielding Mosswood began dissolving under an unavoidable, unrelenting light. Elijah Brooks stepped up to the podium under the bright, unforgiving lights of the National Press Room, a place steeped in history where countless bold political declarations had echoed through the microphones before. But today was different. Today, No one came expecting a grand announcement or a polished statement. They came to listen to a son speak candidly about his mother. Elijah wore no suit, no official badge, and represented no federal bureau. He was simply Elijah, the son of Angela Brooks. Before him stood dozens of cameras, their lenses unblinking, eyes intent, microphones stretched taut as if ready to capture every whispered inflection. Behind him was nothing but a bare wall. No logos, no flags, only a small wooden nameplate placed before him that read plainly, Elijah Brooks, son of Angela Brooks. That was the simple introduction he chose. I am not here to defend a reputation, nor to represent any system, he began, his voice steady, honest. I am here to tell the story of a woman who once believed she was too small to change anything, yet changed everything without ever trying. The room fell into a hush. Elijah did not rely on notes or scripts. Instead, he spoke from memory, the raw recollections of a child awakened in the dead of night to see his mother's office light still burning late into the evening. His mother was no activist. She never marched with megaphones, never led rallies or shouted in protest. She was a quiet force, the woman who spent 10-hour days sitting at a community legal center, writing complaints on behalf of others, secretly slipping copies of statements behind cookbooks for fear they might be lost or destroyed. She had once told him in a quiet moment, "Truth must be recorded before it is replaced by data." Elijah recounted the scraps of paper his mother had carefully kept, the welfare slips for undocumented people, the confirmations from victims whose cases never made it into official records. She kept every scrap, not out of paranoia, but because she understood that some truths would never be entered into official reports, and she wanted an original copy so that when the day came when someone finally asked, she could say, "I witnessed it." He paused, then reached into his chest pocket, pulling out a small folded piece of paper, edges worn and blurred by time. It was his mother's last letter. It contained only a single line, "If you cannot find justice, find a way to tell every name." Elijah read the words slowly, deliberately, with a calm that masked the weight they carried. Folding it carefully, he placed it back into his pocket and spoke quietly but with firm resolve. "I found both, and now I'm here to keep that promise." A reporter seated in the front row took a deep, steadying breath. Another wiped their glasses as if trying to see through more than just physical lenses. Cameramen kept their cameras focused unwaveringly on Elijah's face, a face devoid of anger, yet etched deeply with the quiet endurance that only years of watching a woman who disliked confrontation but never hesitated to stand alone could instill. Elijah slowed his pace, lowering his voice, as if confiding in each person individually. "My mother used to say, every system eventually forgets why it was created, and when that happens, the only thing left to do is remind it, with a story, with testimony, with a quiet act powerful enough to shame its own noise." He said no more. There were no slides, no documents to distribute, no explicit evidence laid bare. None was necessary. What he said was enough. It was enough for the room to understand that great change could begin with a woman who avoided the spotlight, with overlooked scraps of paper, and with a son standing firmly at the intersection of right and wrong, not out of obligation, but because of a love that refuses to compromise with evil. Elijah paused silently, then returned to the microphone. The room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone awaited more, but Elijah remained unhurried. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried no greater volume than before, yet each word landed like a stone striking the floor with undeniable weight. "I am not here merely to tell my mother's story. I am here to remind everyone about those who vanished, leaving behind nothing but statistics." His gaze swept across the rows of press, lingering on a group of reporters known for publishing distorted stories about the Mosswood case last year. Without naming names or uttering harsh accusations, he looked directly at them and said, "Some were labeled cases of unknown causes because they died while handcuffed, lost their minds after detention, or disappeared en route to report. But to my mother, they were never nameless. She gave each one a name." Elijah recounted the story of the teenager dragged from the gas station. The father was branded extremely paranoid after filing suit against the police. The nurse was silenced after recording a threatening officer. None had enough evidence to speak publicly, but Angela kept the records. And now, Elijah spoke for them all. He paused again, pulling from his pocket a folded sheet of paper, but did not unfold it. Inside is the list of those my mother mentioned, those a system hopes you will forget. But don't be mistaken, deleting a name does not erase the truth. His eyes rested momentarily on a female TV reporter who had asked, "Did Angela Brooks make herself a victim?" He did not mention her name, but said bluntly, "Tomorrow, if anyone asks that question again, remember this. Right things often lack timely protection, and few have the courage to stand unflinching in the storm like my mother did." His words held no bitterness or revenge. Instead, they bore a sober acknowledgement of a world where integrity is often swallowed by bureaucracy. Elijah needed no further explanation. In a slower tone, he said, "I do not want to stand here. I would rather be at home, having dinner with my mother as before. But since I no longer have that chance, I must be here to uphold the truth she gave her life for." No interruptions came. No camera flashes pierced the silence. The room became a wall, reverberating each word. Elijah bowed his head, then lifted it one final time. "My mother told me if you must lose everything to keep one truth, that is not loss, that is a choice." He stepped down from the podium, declining to distribute documents or answer questions. His figure disappeared behind the black curtain, but his words linger, etched on every desk, every frame. A warning not to wrongdoers, but to those who once turned a blind eye. Because truth, once named, can never be silenced again. Several months have passed since Elijah stepped away from the podium. Mosswood appears to have resumed its familiar rhythm. Shops open dutifully at dawn. The train whistles resume their daily calls, and commuters hurry along the platforms. Yet in one quiet corner at the edge of the station, time has taken on a different shape. In the patch of scrub grass and loose gravel, where nothing once stirred but dust and stones, a modest stone sculpture now stands. It is not memorialized in city budgets, nor celebrated with any official unveiling. No plaque records its origin, and no ribbon was ever cut. The piece depicts a woman seated upright, her elbow resting gently on her knee, her gaze fixed on a horizon beyond reach. Her face is left blank, as if to invite each observer to project their own truth. Though there is no name inscribed, everyone who pauses there knows exactly whom it represents: Angela Brooks. The funds for the statue were gathered in small, scattered donations. Anonymous transfers, loose change tossed into a weathered collection box by strangers, moved by a news clip, a spoken story, or a second-hand account over the phone. Those who orchestrated its creation declined any credit. No artist's signature, no commission record. The tribute exists simply for what it embodies. Beneath the statue, a slanted black stone bears a single line carved in crisp capitals. "Team stayed, so others could keep walking." No date, no organization, no elaborate citation, yet those 8 words resonate more deeply than any speech once delivered within Mosswood's walls. Locals soon began to guide visitors to this unassuming spot, not to pose for photographs, but to stand in contemplation. A high school teacher brought her class in at noon, asking students to sketch their emotional responses, rather than inquire who the statue depicted. An elderly former court clerk lingered for half an hour before confessing, "I once filed her name in official records. I never guessed she would carry her own truth all the way." Each visitor departed quietly, carrying a renewed sense of what it means to bear witness. Afternoons are particularly poignant. As the sun tilts, long shadows trace the sculpture's silhouette across the tracks, reminding passers-by that forgotten names can reemerge. A law student from a neighboring county sits there weekly, poring over printed case files, then inscribing each victim's name on scraps of paper before tucking them into a small envelope. An older man arrives with white chrysanthemums and a folded note. "Thank you for not letting history pass as if it never happened." Elijah himself visits regularly, choosing a back alley rather than the main entrance, wearing no formal attire, leaving behind an empty used USB or a scrawled scrap of paper nobody retrieves. He does not weep at the base of the statue, but each time he leaves, his shoulders slope with the weight of unfinished business. To him, the sculpture is not a conclusion, but a point of departure, the moment when the community began to choose remembrance over erasure. Children, too, encounter this quiet place. A mother guided her young son here one afternoon. He asked, "Who is she, Mom?" She knelt and whispered, "She is the woman who gave me faith to speak the truth." That very evening, he began keeping a journal. During a sociology project, a teacher instructed students, instead of asking who Angela Brooks was, write how you would honor someone who stayed to do what's right. Some penned multi-page essays, others simply wrote, "I will pass" on her story. Every word, like each tentative step, moved the community forward. Since the statue's installation, the stretch of track it overlooks has ceased commercial service and has quietly been designated an unofficial memorial park. There are no opening hours, no visitor center, only the knowledge that those who seek it will find it. Online, people refer to the site as the Quiet Point, a place where erased faces regain their names, raw truths outlast every suppressive filter, and silent courage speaks louder than any head. Perhaps this is Angela Brooks's most fitting legacy, not a grand monument in her honor, but the simple act of staying, so others, discovering her story, might choose not to walk away. And as Mosswood moves forward, that silent sculpture reminds every passerby that the deepest change begins when someone refuses to disappear. The story of Angela Brooks, Elijah, and those who dared to stand against a deeply corrupt system is far more than a chronicle of individuals fighting for truth. It is a powerful reflection on how our society judges and treats one another. In a world where prejudice can destroy reputations, erase opportunities, even silence the dead, the most important lesson we can learn is this: never judge someone by first impressions alone. Angela Brooks, a seemingly ordinary middle-aged woman who had quietly receded from public view, emerged as the unwavering catalyst for exposing Longbury injustices. Though many assumed she had moved on, she risked everything to gather and preserve evidence, quietly printing and protecting files that authorities sought to suppress. Her persistence reminded a community that courage often looks like simple resolve. And Elijah, once a federal agent haunted by his own mistakes, refused to let shame define him. Rather than burying his past, he turned it into fuel for justice, singing his insider knowledge and connections to amplify Angela's findings. His journey shows us that our scars need not be chains. They can become bridges to rebuild trust. Lana, a seasoned investigative journalist whose professional reputation had been deliberately shattered, found herself stripped of bylines and platforms. Yet she did not accept defeat. When she recognized there was no longer a choice to remain hidden, she rose again, agreeing to publish the unfiltered data, even if it cost her everything. Her story teaches that sometimes reclaiming one's voice is the greatest act of defiance. Marcus, the young officer newly graduated from the academy, faced an internal battle between loyalty to his department and loyalty to his conscience. Though fear and the threat of isolation initially silenced him, Angela's example and the USB she placed in his hands awakened him to the reality that his silence was complicit in the very cover-ups he once believed he served. Marcus's transformation reminds us that the first step toward systemic change often begins with one individual's decision to speak up. None of these heroes is a flawless hero. They have all faltered, hesitated, and been silent at times. Yet what makes their stories exceptional is this singular truth: when the decisive moment arrived, they chose to do the right thing. In a modern world where technology can fabricate entire personas, where genuine voices can be drowned out by algorithms, where raw facts can be buried beneath policy terms and corporate censorship, a single person daring to stand and speak up becomes a revolutionary act. This narrative extends beyond the town of Mosswood. It transcends the specific instances of abuse of power or concealed deaths. It reflects a broader, unsettling reality. Our society remains guided by superficial judgments, and far too many lives and stories are undervalued because they do not align with someone else's perception or someone else's agenda. From the former activist who refused to walk away, to the wounded agent who leveraged his past for justice, to the defamed reporter who reclaimed her platform, to the young officer who rose above fear, these lives illustrate that a person's worth cannot be determined by their appearance, their title, or by rumors and innuendo. True justice does not belong to the strongest or to the loudest. It belongs to those who refuse to bow their heads before wrongdoing. Key takeaways. Prejudice silences truth. We must resist the impulse to form snap judgments based on someone's background, appearance, or the stereotypes we carry. Silence has a cost. Every time injustice goes unchallenged, it gains strength. If we remain silent, we are complicit. Courage can be quiet. Acts of resistance often happen in solitude, in warehouses, in small living rooms, on late-night computer screens, rather than in grand public forums. Everyone has a role, whether as a witness, a whistleblower, a supporter, or an ally. Every contribution matters in upholding truth. Have you ever been judged unfairly because someone misunderstood you? Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove your worth through your actions? Have you witnessed an injustice and wondered if you should intervene? If this story moves you, share it so that others may learn from it. Sometimes transforming society is not about large-scale upheaval, but about waking up to deeply human stories of resilience and moral courage. Justice does not sustain itself. Truth does not spread of its own accord. They require people like you, people who are willing to ask difficult questions, to challenge what seems right, and to stand with those whose voices have been muted. Join us. Subscribe for more stories that honor real people and unvarnished truth. Stories unfiltered by prejudice or power, because one day you too may stand at a crossroads, silence or action. We believe you will choose to act. Thank you for taking the time to follow my channel. Your support and interest are powerful motivations that drive me to continue producing meaningful, high-quality content. In the days ahead, I'll bring you even more compelling stories and sharper perspectives, not just to entertain, but to speak to truths that deserve to be heard. Please keep watching, sharing, and spreading the message, because this journey always has room for those who believe in truth and human worth. Thank you so much.